But by the end of the 60s, certainly by 1970, it became clear to most people that the South, or the Third World, or whatever you want to call it, was as far from achieving substantial economic development as it had been at the time, a decade or more earlier. And so this relative stagnation of the poor countries and their economies opened up a challenge from the left. In other words, it lent credibility, which increased in the context of the economic uncertainties of the 1970s. It lent credibility to another theory of development, which was called underdevelopment, or it was called a dependency theory. And this theory, which came out mainly of Latin America and also the Middle East, it said basically that it's a pipe dream for the poor countries to aspire to development within a framework in which the leading actors are the rich countries, because the rich countries got rich at the expense of the poor countries. In other words, we acquired our wealth not from modernization, science, technology, capital accumulation, building factories and all that kind of stuff. We did it by looting the poor countries, and these countries are poor still because they're still stuck with the same imperial structure that they've had for the last few centuries. And this gave rise to new terms for the post-colonial governments as being neo-colonial. They haven't escaped from the grip of the rich countries. The rich countries have simply got rid of the responsibility for governing these countries while still retaining economic and political powers that make those countries subservient to the interests of the rich. And so this underdevelopment or dependency theory had as its development solution break away from the world capitalist economy. Essentially, countries had to look inwards towards themselves and their own resources, and they had to minimize their dependence on the rich countries because the rich countries essentially continued to increase their own economic situation at the expense of the others. This was sometimes called, in the shape of a writer called Immanuel Wallerstein, world systems theory. The idea was that the world has always been polarized between centers and their peripheries, the outlying marginal areas, and the centers have always essentially developed through a transfer of wealth from the periphery. Now, what this theory is and how it relates to modernization is that this dependency theory is essentially what is known in game theory as a zero-sum game. Now, a zero-sum game is, I wish I could write it out, but I think you might be able to figure it out if I speak it. A plus B equals 0. If you write that down as an algebraic equation, A plus B, and if you imagine A is the rich countries and B is the poor countries, then if you still retain any algebra from secondary school, you can transform that equation into A equals minus B. Figure it out. Subtract B from both sides, and you end up with A equals minus B. Which means, therefore, that's called a zero-sum game, and it's the idea we was robbed. I mean, basically, you guys only made it. I remember, when I was teaching in Jamaica, this guy comes up to me and says, "You English became rich by exploiting my parents as slaves, my ancestors as slaves." And I said, first of all, I'm not English, I'm from Manchester. And second, my ancestors contributed more to the accumulation of capital than yours ever did. But anyway, this is a big debate of where did modern capitalism come from? Did it come from essentially a transfer of wealth from the poor countries that depended on its reproduction for maintaining their poverty? Or was capitalist development a positive sum game? A positive sum game is where A plus B is more than 0. And in that case, it's possible for A to increase without necessarily diminishing B. And of course, modernization and the whole post-war development package was built on this assumption that development was and could be a positive sum game. Nevertheless, the critics who flourished in the 1970s and who to some extent drew sustenance from the other side in the Cold War, drawing their theoretical inspiration from Marxism and so on, these critics were able to, in the face of the economic crisis that was building in the poor countries, I mean, they acquired significant credibility for their theories from this. And, of course, anthropologists supported all of this. I mean, anthropologists tended to go with the underdevelopment dependency side.